Conspiracy. Welcome to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. It's 2 in the morning on the East Coast of the United States. I have no idea what time it is down and under, but it is time for Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mecky. So I hope you have your tinfoil hat all made and cinched down tight over your ears. So take it away, Dave and Mecky.
Welcome to Shiny Side Out with Dave. And Mecky, who's muted, I'm presuming. We're on There he is. We're on WZZR, broadcasting from Australia for Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com, where it's more than just radio, so jump in the chat room if you can. This is show number 271. Dave leaves gap for Mecky to say the number in reverse. I'd turn
170 and 200.
170, 200. Also, okay. So, Mecky, to improve your link today, you know what? We have the most variable speed connections on the planet. One day it's good, the next day it's terrible, and there's no difference between the two of us. Anyway, Revolution Radio is on air, online, and on your smart device, so grab an app to listen anywhere or listen at home on a Grace tabletop digital radio. If you missed Solaris' show, she had Dan Willis on today, and it was a great show, and they talked about UFO disclosure, which I really appreciate, and the Black Space Program. And I don't mean African Americans, I mean hidden, deep black, undisclosed funding. Talking about money, it only costs $5 a month to get access to the Freedom Slips archives and check out Solaris' shows. In fact, not just hers, maybe ours, maybe all the other host shows, because you get access to all of them. And I recommend that you do that. And lastly, I acknowledge the traditional, actually, Mecky and I both do this, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. In my case, it's the Darkinjung people. Mecky?
I've got that here. A second. It's the Daruk people for me.
Daruk. And we pay respects to elders, past, present, and future. Mecky, you've got some terrible lag today. What on earth is going on?
Not sure. I actually only hear the lag from your end, meaning it's I guess everything is coming through a lot slower and there's a lot of echoing. I can only hope that the audio is coming through better now. I've turned my video off. How are we traveling?
Yeah, the audio is much better.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Okay,
yeah, the video is off, so hopefully I rebooted, I reset my router, pirating my bandwidth. I don't know what could be wrong here, so it's just a little odd. Now, I am having some trouble getting to the chat room. There doesn't seem to be a chat room.
There certainly is, and I'm in it.
At least I can't see it. I can only see. You're in it. I can only see the server, so that's a little odd.
Give the old page a refresh, Mickey.
I did. Yeah, I'll try it again. It's all good. It's all good. I'll get there when I get there, and hopefully I can chat to you in the chat room. But look, hopefully the sound is going to come through well to you guys. I hope the audio is going to be sufficient. It's been an interesting week. The end of the world is not upon us. The war has not happened quite yet. We have seen some interesting developments, though, specifically in America. Dave, Donald Trump he's having some issues, and I can't make heads or tail of it. It's just odd. All the things that are going on are very odd, in my opinion. Right? That's just what I think. What do you think?
Well, the first 100-day stats came out, and Fox News were all over it because they were. The stats were talking about negative reporting against Trump and positive versus positive reporting. And Fox actually came good as 52% negative, 48% positive towards Trump in the first 100 days. You have to actually say that matches their statement of being balanced or fairly balanced. Yeah, fair and balanced. Now, the other ones weren't so good. So I think it was up to 70 or 80%, 82% for CNN, or as everyone's comically calling it, the Clinton News Network. But, is he doing himself any favors? All the things that were really quite positive, no one was talking about in the other channels. And so what they focused on were all the negatives.
Yes.
They didn't want the president in place, and they were continuing the narrative, which is that they wished he was impeached. They're looking forward to him being impeached, and why hasn't he been impeached already? And pretty much that's the whole line that the other news networks have taken.
I listened to some expert commentary on the impeachment, and then I want to quickly talk about the... there's some
expert testimony. I love it.
We will not see experts, right? It makes your skin crawl. But it's highly unlikely that President Trump is going to... Unlikely, and I say this because the impeachment process itself is complicated and drawn out. But even if he were impeached by Congress, it would then have to be voted on by the Senate, and that's a highly unlikely scenario. In fact, that has never happened. It has never happened in the history of the United States. So what about Nixon? No. Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. Remember? He resigned. That's what happened. Okay, so that no sitting president has ever been impeached, ever.
Do you know what's...
So that's
didn't
it's
ever...
a highly... Go on, yeah.
Everyone wanted Obama to be impeached. Why? Because of false credentials.
Well...
so
exactly,
what happened to that?
Again,
nothing.
Exactly. That's nothing happened. That's 100% correct. Because it is just too hard. I mean, look, it is put there as a measure of control, and it's not a bad thing. So we have the ability to oust the sitting president. It's not like Australia. See, in Australia, it's different. It's funny, guys. I know that most of you are probably have an Australian listenership as well. In Australia, we vote party. We vote the party, Liberal, Labour, whatever, and they then determine who the prime minister is. So the head of state, effectively, well, actually, he's not the head of state. He's the head of government. The head of state is the governor. The British Queen's representative. Yeah, put that in your pipe and smoke it. But anyway, so we can go through prime ministers like there's no tomorrow, and we have.
Yes, we have.
In fact, because the party leadership can change, and when it does, the prime minister changes. So, and we have no say as the people. We have no say in that. It is actually done by the party that holds the majority in our parliament, the Westminster system. Gotta love it, right? Whereas you, of course, have more direct control. Well,
directly indirect.
Yeah, exactly.
You have just
well,
in America, Mekki, in America, they have a lot of fail safes to ensure that let's say the correct person gets in. No. Even that sounds preposterous when you think about it. But you certainly do have fail-safes. However, the president is the president. However, in the past, the president was only supposed to go through Congress for approval for floating bills and having them approved. But, in the last two presidencies, including this one and the previous one, the presidential orders have been the highest rate they've ever been ever. Which bypasses Congress. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah. And in fact, look, look. This presidency is going to be a presidency of firsts. Virtually everything President Trump does is going to be first. He's not beholden to anyone. But you know what I find interesting, and this is actually in line with the old elite, Dave. And you might find this interesting. The very first nation he is visiting on his very first international tour.
Oh, yes.
Is in fact Saudi Arabia.
And then Israel.
Sorry?
And then Israel.
Correct. Now, that's really astounding. Anyway, Melania apparently doesn't have to wear a headscarf. It's all good. You try to have your wife travel in Saudi Arabia without a headscarf. Good luck to you. But but the thing is that it shows just how deeply entrenched the relationship is between Saudi Arabia and the United States. I mean, I don't know if you remember the footage from the olden days. Olden days, a few decades ago, 20, 30 years ago, when George Bush Sr., back then in his capacity as, I think, Secretary of State, even Vice President, or maybe, yeah. Anyway, he went to Saudi Arabia and kissed the royal Saudi's ring and all these wonderful things. So there's a deeply troubling relationship in my mind between Saudi Arabia and the United States, which is underscored again by President Trump's visit to that country. Look, there's some other interesting things that have happened. Of course, there's allegations against China having killed U.S. sources. That's probably true. And we still are suffering from Brexit, meaning that the British and the Europeans still haven't quite worked out what's going to happen, and it's just a shambles. It really is. So it's horrendous. Having said that, though, today's topic is going to be time travel. And yes, we've done it before. And the reason we're doing it today is because there have been some updates to the time travel story, specifically around what is possible. What is possible from a scientific point of view. Now, this is a very long show cycle. So this show will be with us, I would say, for, I'd say, three shows. So the next 3 Sundays, we shall be discussing time travel with you, and we'll get to the articles in the last show. And just to let you know, the articles I'm referring to are number one, the time travel simulation resolves the grandfather paradox. That was written in 2014, but more recently, articles were written in June of 2015, and this is time atom, and we're going to talk about quantum physics there, or the article will tell us a lot about it anyway. And there's another article from October 11, 2016, and the computer solves a major time travel problem, which is in fact the grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox, but we will get to that toward the end of the show cycle in maybe 3 weeks, I would say, depending on how quickly we can get through this material here. But time travel is one of those fascinating things, guys, isn't it? Is it a possibility? Can we in fact travel back in time and alter the course of our lives? Could we do it just for ourselves, or can we affect larger points in history? Such as, would you go back in time and kill Hitler? I mean, would you? Should you? And if you did, what would be the outcome? I mean, would it have any impact at all? I mean, okay, Hitler is just one person. There's a whole machine that supported him in the Nazi Germany era, right? There's a whole machine behind him, so people waiting in the wings, as it were. Is killing one person enough to change the course of history? Are there in fact lynch points, pinnacle points, on axis points in history where one action could push us one way as opposed to another? These are questions that are really, really interesting. And I myself obviously like science fiction. I love alternative history science fiction. And recently there have been some really good books out. And then not just recently, but for the longest time, people have loved to write about time travel as well as make movies. And then one of my favorite movies, in fact, is the original Time Machine that actually it came out in the 50s, if I remember correctly. Fantastic. It was really cool movie. If you remember the Morlocks, the Eloi, and after 800,000 years, how the human race had evolved into those two strands. One being cannibals living underground, the other being pretty much bred like sheep and food for the Morlocks. I love that movie. I really do. No, it's a fairly free interpretation of H.G. Wells' Time Machine, but nonetheless highly entertaining and thought-provoking nonetheless. Then, of course, there was a sequel written to the original Time Machine called Time Ships. Time Ships. If you get a chance to read it, I highly recommend it. It is in fact a direct continuation of the story told in the Time Machine. But so that's the literature, and we've always been fascinated by time travel as people, of course, right? Let's look at a few things here that we've shared with you. In fact, this was show number 4. Time travel was our show number 4, which is now well over 6 years ago. And then again, we revisited the subject in show number 144. So almost, actually about 3 years ago. And then now again, we shall look at time travel and see what has changed from a scientific point of view. And in the meantime, we've discussed quantum physics ad nauseum. We have looked at scientific breakthroughs. We've looked at the edge of science and where we are with this show. And hopefully you had been with us for the journey, enjoyed it as well. That would be good. Having said all that, this is what Albert Einstein had to say about time. The distinction between the past, present, and future is only an illusion, however persistent. Now, what did he mean by that? Well, in mathematics, the flow or the direction, the vector of time is completely irrelevant. So meaning in mathematics, physics, the way time is perceived to flow has actually no influence on the way any calculations or algorithms turn out. Okay? It is completely irrelevant from a mathematical point of view. But what is time? What is time? And we're going to discuss this in some more detail a little bit later on and give you my insight that I shared with you 3 years ago. So Gilgamesh, I agree. It's time for a rewatch if you haven't watched The Time Machine. I will make comments to the chat room once in a while, guys. So if you are listening to this on YouTube, do try to come and listen to us live. I know in America it's a very hostile time zone, but it's good fun in the chat rooms. It really is good fun in the chat rooms. There's always some very interesting people there and good banter and it's good discussions. But yeah, sorry. So time, right? I mean, time is something that we perceive, something that we perceive as motion through space, really, right? Think about it. If there was no motion, no movement at all, there'd be no time. There'd be no appearance of time. There would be no way to measure time. So motion and time are intimately linked in our perception of reality. But it doesn't describe time very well. I mean, time is referred to often as the fourth dimension. Maybe if you wanted to represent it on a graph and you look at the first 3 dimensions, the ones we physically are moving in, up, down, left, right, forward, and backwards, if you will. So these are our 3 spatial dimensions. And the interesting thing is this: if you do represent them mathematically, they are all at right angles to each other. So a square obviously describes the 3 dimensions perfectly. They're all at right angles. Now, is it possible then that time itself is at a right angle to our spatial dimensions? I'd like to think it probably works something like that. And then I would also like to think of time maybe as a differentiator or a further parameter definition for tracks. So while there's our spatial dimension and with its time dimension, there might be very many more. The multi-worlds theory comes to mind, for this. And you can think of each track, or can think of as a track and think of it as a page in a book, as a membrane, if you will. But essentially, if you look at our existence is not the way we perceive it. When we look around, we see static objects. That's all we see. I mean, even ourselves, we're static objects. If you could make a movie of yourself, which displays you all at once for let's say 5 minutes. Let's say 5 minutes of your life, you take a movie of yourself, but it displays you in totality, meaning it doesn't go from frame to frame, but it looks at you in what happens in those 5 minutes. And what happens is, in fact, that you are appearing like a worm or a line. It's called your world line because you're moving around, and as you move around, you're filling space. But if you saw it all at once, you would not appear as a human being as you do, moment to moment, but you would appear as a line or a worm, right? That moves about. And that's what people refer to as the world line. Yeah, that's important. And in fact, if you watched yourself your entire life this way, it would start very sort of small, and then that world line would grow, as you fill out, and then as you get older and frailer, it might shrink again, right? But there's a lot of motion and looping in around things. It's only time or the moment that we perceive as being our reality that makes it possible for us to actually see each moment. Right? If we could see our life in totality, it would be very different to what we all perceive, right now. But the totality of our existence looks very different. But look up world lines. It's really, there's some really good visualizations of that as well. It's pretty cool. There's an interesting comment here from Alien Girl. This is a Groundhog Day planet. Round and round we go. Interestingly enough, what's his name? He wrote the Metamorphosis. I can't think of his name now. Castle. He also wrote the Castle. It's a German Jewish writer. He lived in Russia as well. And essentially, what he believed is that we live our lives over and over again, exactly the same life. Now, he was actually quite ill, but he believed that it's a form of reincarnation, though not really. We just are doomed to live the same life over and over and over again. And I can't think of his name right now. I've got a complete mental blank. It's Kafka, Franz Kafka. Get a chance to read Kafka, go ahead and do so. Anyway, so what is time and time travel? Time travel is the concept of moving between different points in time, and analogous to moving between different points in space. Generally using a theoretical invention known as a time machine. When do we want a time machine? It doesn't matter. It's invented, you can't uninvent it. Not a time machine. Time travel is a recognized concept in philosophy and fiction, but has very limited support in theoretical physics, and usually only in conjunction with quantum mechanics or the Einstein-Rosen bridges, quantum wormholes, things like that. Some theories, most notably special and general relativity, suggest that suitable geometries of space-time or specific types of motion in space might allow time travel into the past and future if these geometries or motions were possible. In technical papers, physicists generally avoid the commonplace language of moving or traveling through time. Movement normally refers only to a change in spatial position as the time coordinate is varied, and instead discuss the possibility of closed time-like curves. Closed time-like curves, CTCs, we're going to talk about those a lot, which are world lines that form closed loops in space-time, allowing objects to return to their own past. They are known to be solutions to the equations of general relativity that describe spacetimes which contain closed time-like curves, such as Gödel spacetime. But the physical plausibility of these solutions is uncertain. So we can imagine a whole bunch of stuff, right, and theoretical physics, theoretical mathematics, but the reality have not yet proven out. Now, relativity predicts that if one were to move away from the Earth at relativistic velocities, now that means close to the speed of light, and return, more time would have passed on Earth than for the traveler. So in this sense, it is accepted that relativity allows travel into the future. According to relativity, there's no single objective answer to how much time has really passed between the departure and the return, but there's an objective answer to how much proper time has been experienced by both the Earth and the traveler, which of course is expressed as aging. Now, we've actually proven, not recent times, but we've proven that the faster you go, the slower time goes for you. So what they did, they took this supersonic jet, flew it high up into the atmosphere, and flew very, 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 very fast. Before they did that, they actually brought along an atomic clock on the plane, and they had it synced with an atomic clock on the Earth, so that stayed, and the clock that went into the plane, they were synchronized, and off they went. When the plane came back with the atomic clock, they compared it, and in fact, the atomic clock on the plane was slower. The atomic clock, the Earth, meaning that relativity seems to be correct. The faster you go, slower time goes for you, which is an interesting thing. We'll get back to that. There's some stories from ancient philosophies and ancient religions which seem to echo some of this. Very interesting stuff. On the other hand, many in the scientific community believe that backwards time travel is highly unlikely. Any theory that would allow time travel would induce potential problems of causality. Causality, cause and effect. Cause and effect. If we have nothing in the past 6 years listening to Chinese Hideout, it is this. If nothing else, it is this. Causality has gone out the window. Okay, cause and effect pretty much gone out the window. It's from the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. Causality no longer seems to be a thing that needs to hold us down. So cause and effect are not as ironclad as once we thought. So that, of course, has implications for time travel. And the classic example of a problem involving causality is the grandfather paradox. Hello, Mr. Rowe. What if one were to go back in time and kill one's own grandfather before one's father was conceived? However, some scientists believe that paradoxes can be avoided by appealing either to the Novikov self-consistency principle or to the notion of branching parallel universes. Now, the self-consistency principle essentially states that the universe is self-consistent, therefore any attempts at altering it will be met with resistance. So in effect, meaning you can't actually alter the past. Maybe observe it, but you can't alter it. Like some kind of immutable physical law. Or, if you can alter it, we go back into the parallel universes, the multiverse theory, that each alteration that you make to the your timeline, will actually result in a new universe. So let's say you do go back in time and you kill your grandfather before your father is born. What would happen then? The universe in which you killed your grandfather would split off from the one that you inhabited, making it impossible for you, in fact, to go back to your original universe, the original timeline, because you altered the timeline. So your timeline is still moving along. So you went back in time, killed your grandfather, and at that point, you split the two timelines. The original timeline still exists, except you are now on a different track. You're on the track where you killed your grandfather and you never existed. That's okay, because your original timeline is still fine. You have not only traveled back in time, but you have also traveled interdimensionally at that point. Yeah, that's what that means. I think it sounds cool. Really do, right? I really think it sounds cool. But as we will see in the conclusion of this show cycle, recent findings have shown that the grandfather paradox might in fact not be as paradoxical as we think it is. And secondly, as we all know that causality has gone out the window, maybe there simply aren't any paradoxes. Okay? This is the thing, and as I've read about this a lot, obviously, I come across a couple of things. One is the word logic. Two is the notion of causality. These are the two things I come across a lot. Our perception of causality and our understanding of logic are merely that. They are our interpretation of what the world should look like according to what we think. Okay, we're trying to shoehorn reality into our belief systems. Maybe reality doesn't want to do that. Maybe reality does not want to be shoehorned into our belief systems. Okay, and 50, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, we might understand that causality and the logic are in fact not the pillars of existence we thought them to be. This is important to understand, okay? Because we learn more stuff all the time. We used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe. That was one of the pillars of our knowledge, and we also believed the Earth was flat. Right? Again, one of the pillars of our knowledge. Now, I'm not going to go into debate here about flat Earth and the Earth-centric universe. But we have moved on from that. Right? And I know some of you might disagree with the moving on, but we have, and now we believe something else. Is that new something else any better or worse than the old something else? Well, not in reality, not really. I mean, it doesn't make too much of a difference to people's everyday lives. I mean, to your life, it would no difference at all if the Earth was the center of the universe or not. You'd still live your life the way you do. Now, we believe now the Earth is in fact not the center of the universe. The Sun is not the center of the universe, but we are rather somewhat in the darker regions of a large galaxy spiraling through the cosmos, quite removed from the center. In fact, right, we're quite far out on one of the arms of that galaxy. That's our perception right now. And that perception might change. It might look at us from a multiverse theory. We maybe right now we think, oh, we're the center of the multiverse. Well, that's probably not true either. Not true. Maybe we're on the outer edges of the multiverse, if there's such a thing. So it's all a matter of perception. It's a matter of understanding. It's a matter of learning. So as we go along, hopefully we become more knowledgeable. I don't think we become smarter necessarily. I think we've had the potential to be as smart as we are today. Unless there's some further changes to our brain or the way we process information. But we certainly have the potential to accumulate more knowledge and hopefully gain some insights from that. That's our journey. It's our task. That's what we should be doing. Like they do in the Star Trek universe, we should be out there getting as much information as we can, trying to make sense of the universe we're in. Now, there are of course ancients that have thought about time travel. And I want to share this with you guys. This is interesting stuff. Right? This is the forward time travel. Some ancient myths depicted characters skipping forward in time. In Hindu mythology, the Mahabharata mentions the story of King Raivata Kakubini, who travels to heaven to meet the creator Brahma and is surprised to learn when he returns to Earth that many ages have passed. Now, I'll share the rest of this with you, and then we'll talk about this for a second. The Buddhist Pali Canon mentions the relativity of time. The Payasi Sutta tells of one of the Buddha's chief disciples, Kumara Kassapa, who explains to the skeptic Payasi that in the heaven of the 33 devas, time passes at a different pace, and people live much longer. In the period of our century, 100 years, only a single day, 24 hours would have passed for them. It's the Japanese tale of Urashima Taro, first described in the Nihongi, which was written in 720 AD or CE, a young fisherman named Urashima Taro, who visits an undersea palace. After 3 days, he returns home to his village and finds himself 300 years in the future. Where he has been forgotten, his house is in ruins, and his family has died. Early science fiction stories in the year 2040, it's a French by looking backwards in the sleep. Time travel in those stories, but let's quickly go back to the different passing of time. So in ancient times, it seems people had a differently or different speeds of time. This could be a memory of basic science. It could be some ancient highly technological society or civilization that went under. It transmits a certain understanding and learning, maybe even of visitors. Because if you are taken, for argument's sake, from this planet, and you travel at close to light speed, time will pass a lot slower. And the further you travel and the faster you are, the more time will pass on the Earth. So if you come back after, let's say, 5 years for you, hundreds or even thousands of years could have passed on the Earth. So we should dismiss these ancient stories, and especially when they talk about the fairy folk. Into like Rip Van Winkle, for example, you go into the world of the fairy folk, and you eat and drink their food and drink, fall asleep. Hundreds of years can pass for you. Maybe it's echoing memory of something that actually happened. Maybe maybe it's also a hint or an indication of different dimensions where time potentially passes at much different rates. And if you physically partake in that dimension, so eating the food there, for example, then you are affected by that as well, potentially. It brings to mind the story of Spirited Away. I don't know if you've seen that. I love anime, and the Studio Ghibli animations are specifically great. I think very very nicely put together. But my favorite, I think, is Spirited Away, where a young girl goes in fact into the world of the spirits, and only after she eats something in that world can she sustain herself and exist in that world. And then, there's the trials and tribulations as she tries to find her parents. Interestingly enough, when they come back from that world, including her parents, which she managed to rescue, the car that they come back to is quite dirty, and there's quite a lot of debris that has deposited itself on the car that they left outside as they went to journey into their tunnel, which then eventually took them into the spirit world. So time could very well have gone differently there as well. Look, if you haven't seen it, Spirited Away, Studio Ghibli, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful tale, and not just for children. It's really, really cool. And we also have stories of backwards time travel. And it seems to be a more modern idea, though. But its origin is also somewhat ambiguous. One early story, which with hints of backwards time travel, is Memoirs of the 20th Century, written in 1733 by Samuel Madden, which is mainly a series of letters from British ambassadors in various countries to the British Lord High Treasurer, along with a few replies from the British Foreign Office, all reportedly written in 1997 and 1998 and describing the conditions of that era. However, the framing story is that these letters were actual documents given to the narrator by his guardian angel one night in 1728. For this reason, Paul Elkins suggests in his book Origins of Futuristic Fiction that the first time traveler in English literature is a guardian angel who returns with state documents from 1998 to the year 1728. Although the book does not explicitly show how the angel obtained these documents. Alcon later qualifies this by writing, "It would be stretching our generosity to praise Madden for being the first to show a traveler arriving from the future, but also says that Madden deserves recognition as the first to toy with the rich idea of time travel in the form of an artifact sent backwards from the future to be discovered present." In 1836, Alexander Veltman published Pretki Kalamerosa, Alexander Filipovich Makedonsky, The Forebears of Kalameros, Alexander son of Philip, Macedon, which has been called the first original Russian science fiction novel and the first novel to use time travel. In it, the narrator writes to ancient Greece on a hippogriff, meets Aristotle, and goes on a voyage with Alexander the Great before returning to the 19th century. Time travel is something that's really fascinating us. It is, of course it is. Who wouldn't like to have a chance to do over? But this is where it becomes difficult. Let's say you have got, yourself a very nice family and things are going well, but you still want to know, is time travel possible? Should I go on time travel? What if you do? Let's say you have the opportunity to time travel and you travel back in time, 20 years, 30 years, 40, 50, it doesn't matter. But then you do something that alters your timeline. And when you travel back to your time, which may not be your time because you've altered the timeline, you find things have changed. Your family no longer exists. Or you live in a different country. You don't have a job, or whatever it might be. Let's take it seriously for a second, right? There is a lot to be careful about travel through time. Because we don't know what the effects will be going forward. Some theories say, it'll all just wash out. It'll just wash out. No matter what you do, if you imagine time as a big river, every little ripple that you create will just wash away and will not make any major changes. But what if you divert the flow of that river with your little pebble? With just that little pebble is enough to divert it. And it would leave you stranded. person out of time, a person out of their own reality, no longer able to fit in because you've effectively destroyed your own place in time. So our existence is a very tenuous collection of events. Everything that has happened in your life up to this point has brought you exactly here. You are who you are because of all the things that have happened in your past. If they hadn't happened in exactly the same way that they did, you would not be the person you are today. It's that simple. It really is. And you can, do the same projecting into the future. I mean, everything that's going to happen to you between, now and your demise will form you into who you are. Every day, every moment. You take these moments away, you alter them. You're no longer the person that you set out. So it becomes very complex very quickly. And I don't think we can just simply dismiss the effect time travel might have on us. I think the most benevolent or the most beneficial time travel for us would be, in fact, the multi-world theory time travel, where if you do go back in time and you change the timeline, all you're changing is you're creating maybe another time stream, or you're hopping between dimensional streams. That's all goodness. You're not actually hurting the time stream that you originated from. So you might not be able to go back to it, but at least you would have the comfort of knowing that your time stream is still okay and people will go on, albeit without you. Interestingly enough, the way that we measure time actually goes back to Sumerian times, base 12. So it's also interesting to understand that we have natural time and mechanical time. Now, natural time is the rising and setting of the sun, changing of the seasons, and that's what what we like to call primitive people go by. What we have now, mechanical time, is much more rigid, unnatural. It's just not like the way we exist today. We sleep for 8 hours, work for 8 hours, whatever it might be. Our days are ordered into 24-hour cycles, and then those days are organized into weeks, and those weeks are organized into months, and the months are organized into years, and so on and so forth, with little regard to the natural time. Little regard, unless you follow a moon calendar, which is more natural than our solar calendar. So it's really interesting to see that happening more and more. So our natural time is actually largely dying within us. Some people or cultures that preserve natural time, such as in Spain, when you go for a siesta. So in the morning, breakfast, you wake up, you do your thing, and then you go home, have a sleep, because your body clock says I should rest now, and then you come out again at 2-3 o'clock whenever. You're still productive until late in the evening, and then you do your thing. We also used to sleep differently, believe it or not. We used to have a little sleep, 2 or 3 hours. Then we get up and have a midnight meal, go around, visit friends, and then we go back to bed after a couple hours of activity, or the big sleep. These were sleep patterns. With the advent of modern times, factory work, people having to be a certain place at a certain time for a prescribed number of hours, rather than making their own time, has changed all of that. We have been press-ganged to mechanical time, most of us. And we've become obsessed with it. I mean, who cares if you're a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes late for a meeting? Ooh, no. See, these days that's important. If you had lived in Roman times, and your meeting would have been something like, let's meet in the morning hour. Yeah. What that meant is any time between 8 and 11, pretty much. That's the morning hour. Let's meet then. Sure. Absolutely, we'll do that. Because time was perceived to be, a more leisurely experience. Even though people lived shorter lives, I believe they might have lived more full lives that could be enjoyed more. Just my opinion. You're wrong. I should share with you very quickly, though, while I still think of it, because we're at the first half almost, or actually a little bit over. You can get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. You can buy a CD of your favorite show hosts for previous season, an EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents, or a 75K seed bag. and you just follow the instructions carefully on that. The number to call in if you are in the United States of America is 347-688-2902, 347-688-2902, or via Skype. You just add Freedom Screen. Freedom Screen. Beautiful. It's a little message from the station for everybody. And do remember that this is, in fact, listener-funded radio. It is listener-funded radio, meaning you are in the driver's seat, support the station, and this month looks pretty good. So don't stop supporting now, if you can. In fact, if you subscribe for a measly $5, you can look at, or listen rather, I should say, look at, of course, as well, all the station's archives. Solaris' show and so. Solaris' show is something actually really cool. She's got amazing guests. She herself has a very interesting life story, and if you get your hands on maybe her documentary or her books, I urge you to do so and then just look more closely into what she has experienced. But yeah, look, with a little bit of cash, you can access all of those archives. And if you wanted to donate, that would be great, because no large corporation is sponsoring us or, in fact, this station. All the hosts are doing this pro bono for free, gratis. We get paid ziddly, squiddly, doddly, nothing. Okay. Anywho, let's get back to time travel. Now, you might have heard of the Large Hadron Collider. I think Dave might have some pictures of it in the broadcast. A lot of people believe that the Hadron Collider may in fact be used to create a black hole. Others believe it is a very elaborate time travel machine. Anything is possible, of course. We have heard other accounts from other guests and other researchers that time travel is in fact something that is happening. And you ask yourself, well, if that is true, then why is history such a mess? Why is history such a mess? Well, my answer to you is maybe because there is time travel. Maybe that's why history is the mess it is. Don't quote me on that. Now, according to Einstein's theory, gravity is a curve in space-time, and astronomers regularly observe this phenomenon when they study light moving near a sufficiently massive object. Particularly large suns, for instance, can cause an otherwise straight beam of light to curve in what we call the gravitational lensing effect. Lensing effect. Now, you see it's most pronounced with a black hole, a neutrino star, because what happens essentially is that light cannot even escape from a black hole because it is so dense. It has such a strong gravitational force. Now, what does time have to do with that? Now, remember, any event that occurs in the universe has to involve both space and time. Gravity doesn't just pull on space, gravity also pulls on time. You wouldn't be able to notice minute changes in the flow of time, but a sufficiently massive object would make a huge difference. Say, like the supermassive black hole Sagittarius A at the center of our own galaxy. Here, the mass of 4 million suns exists as a single, infinitely dense point known as a singularity. Okay? A teaspoon full of that matter would weigh billions of tons. Billions of tons. Very heavy, very, very heavy. Circle this black hole for a while without falling in, so you stay nice and clear of the event horizon, and you experience time at half the rate on Earth. In other words, you'd round out a 5-year journey to discover an entire decade has passed on Earth. Right, so speed also plays a role in the rate at which we experience time, as I mentioned earlier. Time passes more slowly the closer you approach the unbreakable cosmic speed limit that we call the speed of light. For instance, the hands of a clock in a speeding train move more slowly than those of a stationary clock. And we actually have tested that, like I said, supersonic jet. Now, do I believe that the speed of light is in fact the cosmic speed limit? I do not believe that, for various reasons. We discussed this in the past, but I also believe that our perception of reality is in fact not at all what reality is like at all. And if quantum mechanics has told us nothing but that, then this is sufficient for me. Surely, very important lesson to take away from it. Now, let's go back to the... A human passenger wouldn't feel the difference, but at the end of the trip, the speeding clock would be slowed by billionths a second, femtoseconds. If such a train could attain 99.999% of light speed, only 1 year pass on board for every 223 years back at the train station. What relativistic travel will do in our Einsteinian universe. I do believe, however, that if you move into the quantum world, things look... There are also something called Kerr black holes or Kerr rings, Kerr. In 1963, New Zealand mathematician Roy Kerr proposed the first realistic theory for a rotating black hole. The concept hinges on neutron stars, which are massive collapsed stars the size of Manhattan, but with the mass of Earth's sun. Very, very heavy. Kerr postulated that if dying stars collapsed into a rotating ring of neutron stars, their centrifugal force would prevent them from turning into a singularity. So they wouldn't all collapse to the middle, essentially. The centrifugal force would keep the mass out middle. Since the black hole wouldn't have a singularity, Kerr believed it would be safe to enter without fear of the infinite gravitational force at its center. If Kerr black holes exist, scientists speculate that we might pass through them and exit through a white hole. Think of this as the exhaust end of a black hole. Instead of pulling everything into its gravitational force, the white hole would push everything out and away from it. Perhaps into another time or even into another universe. So let's very quickly say this again. So black holes are essentially infinitely dense singularities, right? Everything has collapsed to a single point. Super dense, we don't know what happens to anything that falls into it. No idea. All natural physical laws stop functioning in a black hole. A Kerr black hole is different because it doesn't collapse into a singularity. The centrifugal forces, things that push things out from its center, as you've all been on the ride, I'm sure, in the amusement park. It's just really a disc you stand on. You start in the middle, you hold on to the middle, and then as the disc spins up, it pushes you out. That's essentially the centrifugal force. And if you apply that to neutron stars, then you may end up with a Kerr black hole. Essentially a black hole that you could use for time or interdimensional travel. That would be really cool. Now, there's also something called the Einstein-Rosen bridge. It's a wormhole, really. That's, if you like Star Trek or whatever, then you are very much familiar with the concept of wormholes. And so if your math teacher used to ask you in school, what's the shortest distance between 2 points? And you would say, a straight line, you probably get full marks, but the real answer is nothing. The shortest distance between 2 points is exactly at all. Connected by wormhole, in fact. Okay, so not a straight line, but nothing. It's hyperdimensional math. It's also quantum physics, entanglement, all that. Shortest distance is nothing. Let's talk about the Einstein-Rosen bridge. The theory of relativity allows for the existence of wormholes since it states that any mass curves spacetime. Any mass, right? Any massive object curves spacetime, has an effect on spacetime. Okay? To understand this curvature, think about 2 people holding a bedsheet up and stretching it tight. If one person were to place a baseball in the bedsheet, the weight of the baseball will roll to the middle of the sheet and cause the sheet to curve at that point. Same thing with spacetime, sort of. Sort of, okay? Now, if you were to place a marble at the edge of the same bedsheet, it would travel toward the baseball because of that curvature. Make sense? Now, this is a simplified example. In space here is depicted as a 2-dimensional plane rather than a 4-dimensional one. Right? So clearly, it's a simplified example. Imagine that this sheet is folded over, leaving a space between the top and the bottom. Placing the baseball on the top side will cause a curvature to form. Okay? If an equal mass were placed on the bottom part of the sheet at a point that corresponds with the location of the baseball on the top, the second mass would eventually meet with the baseball. This is similar to how wormholes might develop. So the question is or can space be folded? Can space be folded? Well, if it's just a way to visualize what actually happens. Just a way to visualize what actually happens. In the higher dimensional spaces, the folding, or something that we call folding, might not be necessary. And distance as we perceive it might not exist, as witnessed by quantum entanglement. It's important to understand that all of these things I'm talking about are merely simplifications or ways to make us understand something fairly complex within the framework of our understanding. In space, masses that place pressure on different parts of the universe combine eventually to create a kind of tunnel. Right? So if something is sufficiently massive, in our example, the damaged, punched through, as it were, and the 2 points could connect. Maybe. If in this tunnel, however, in theory, would join 2 separate times and allow passage between them. Of course, it's also possible that some unforeseen physical or quantum property prevents such a wormhole occurring. And if they do exist, they may potentially be very unstable. We just don't know. According to astrophysicist Stephen Hawking, arguably a very smart fella, wormholes may exist in quantum foam, the smallest environment in the universe. We've spoken about the quantum foam, and we've also spoken that Dave and I think this might be the ether, the underlying reality matrix from which everything else is formed. Here, he says, tiny tunnels constantly blink in and out of existence, momentarily linking separate places and times, like an ever-changing game of chutes and ladders. I think we're coming close to the top of the hour, guys, so when the music starts, stay with me, don't go away. There'll be more time travel stuff coming up after the break. And there's the music. If you can in the break donate, please do so. Thank you very much, guys, and do stay on the line.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
There is no denying the world is awakening. We see it in the global uprisings and demonstrations of the people around the planet and the new way of thinking and living that is arising naturally within each one of us and our communities. I have been a major player in this global shift and movement for over 20 years and have helped tens of thousands of people around the world change their lives and find their voice in order to help create the paradigm change we so desperately need. Join me here at Revolution Radio on the Just Bernard Show every Tuesday at noon Eastern Eastern Time for 2 hours of powerful interviews and discussion with some of the most influential visionaries of consciousness, alternative media, and suppressed knowledge. We promise to reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience.
Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
On the go? Still want to listen? Don't have one of those fancy phones with too many buttons? Don't know what an app is? Or you don't even care? Well, we got you here at Revolution Radio. Now you can dial in 24/7 to listen to our shows. We have a number for Studio A and Studio B, and best of all, it's free. Don't forget, carrier charges for your cell phone provider may apply though, so check with your cell provider to make sure. So ready? Here you go. Get a pen. Here's the number. Studio A is 712-432-6958, and Studio B is 716-748-0112. Thank you very much for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station in the world. Opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Alrighty, hello and welcome back to Dave and Mackey's Shiny Side Out, show number 271, 170 and 200. We're talking about time travel. What else would we be talking about? Of course, time travel. It feels like deja vu. That's because it was show number 4. It was show number 4, and then we updated in show number 144. And now it's show number 271, 170 and 200, and we have updates yet again for you. That's why I said at the beginning of this, this will probably take 3 Sundays or Saturdays if you States. Dave!
Yeah.
All good?
I am back, Mickey, back.
Stuff. Now, the last bit here I want to share with you is cosmic strings. Cosmic strings, something that was suggested by J. Richard Gott in 1991. As the name suggests, these are string-like objects that some scientists believe were formed in the early universe. String theory. These strings may weave throughout the entire universe, thinner than an atom and under immense pressure. Naturally, this means they pack quite a gravitational pull on anything that passes near them, enabling objects attached to a cosmic string to travel at incredible speeds and benefit from time dilation. By pulling 2 cosmic strings close together or stretching one string close to a black hole, it might be possible to warp space-time enough to create what's called a closed time-like curve, CTC, as we mentioned earlier. Using the gravity produced by the 2 cosmic strings, or the string of the black hole, a spaceship theoretically could propel itself into the past. To do this, it would loop around the cosmic strings, like a cosmic slingshot. The space-time structure. Space-time structure. If it allows for it. Now, I had another epiphany 6 years ago. This is not the epiphany around the hypothesis and why we're here, but rather around space-time. Space-time. Time is motion. No motion, no time. I think we can agree on that. There was no movement, there would be nothing that would register as time with us. So there's motion. Even if it is little motion, there's motion. Okay. Now, what is motion? Motion is movement through space. Any space, all the time. Even if you're standing still right now, you're moving at an incredible rate through the solar system and through the galaxy and through the universe, because the Earth is and the Sun is, and we are all traveling at incredible speeds all the time. There are, as far as I know, no stationary objects in this universe. Oh, but Mackie, what about Lagrange points? Yes, in relation to the Earth and other heavenly bodies, there are points in space which are completely stationary. But even they move, because the object they are stationary in relation to moves. Okay, so everything is in constant motion, even if it appears to be stationary. Okay, take my word for it. Everything is moving. Now, quantum entanglement, though. Quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance. And just very quickly, a recap. Two particles are entangled in such a way that if you make a change to one particle, spin, for example, that very same change happens instantaneously to the other particle, no matter what the distance. Now, quantum entanglement proves that space and distance are not absolute and may be an illusion. So, space and distance are not absolute, because how else could you explain instantaneous facts? Instantaneous, no time passed whatsoever. Okay? Simultaneous response, no matter the distance. No matter the distance. All right. Now, remember this? Time is motion through space, therefore covering distance in space. That's what it is. However, if distance and space are not absolutes, or maybe an illusion, then time must not be absolute or an illusion. Because if there's nothing to be traversed, if there is no distance, why would you require time to go through it? You with me? Hopefully you're still with me. What I'm saying here is that because space and distance may not be real, the perceived time we need to traverse it is also not real. It is one of the elegant traps we fall into in this reality, which is never questioned. It is never questioned. It is never taken to doubt, ever, because it's just a fundamental piece of our existence, time and space, and movement through space, which is expressed as time. I hope I haven't lost you. I hope you are with me, and I hope that you understand how this is very important for the hypothesis, and how our universe, our reality here, is in fact merely an illusion, a prison for our consciousness. Dave, did I lose you?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm comfortably
okay, good man.
attuned to this topic. Now, I wanted just to preface something, and it's in relation to the quantum entanglement, Mackie. I was speaking with a good friend of mine last night into the wee hours, and I had to bring up the double slit and the double slit delayed experiment so that I could grasp it, not only myself, but be able to word it in such a way that it would make sense for a listener. And my friend's got his head screwed on correctly. He knows who he is. Hi there. And it was great catching up. However, if you're not quite sure what it is, the double slit experiment, you look at that and work that out. There's plenty of information there. It's been around for almost 100 years. However,
That's right.
something very interesting about it, and that is the delayed addition to this, where you take a copy of the photon, an entangled copy of the photon, and you send it a distance further than the rear screen, which ends the life of the photon that collides with it. Okay, you with me? Hope you're staying with me here. And its copy travels further before it itself is determined, tested to determine which state it is in. Okay, because we know the double slit experiment, observing it collapses it into our reality, and non-observance, observance of the which gate it goes through, which slot it goes through, A or B, left or right, causes an interference pattern on the back wall. Now that state of the particle can be determined by its partner particle. And when it is, think about this for a minute, when it is tested, the original experiment goes and collapses. When it's not observed, it's maintained as an interference pattern or a wave pattern. So if you think about it as a particle pattern or a wave pattern, it collapses back to a particle pattern. Now, the quantum entanglement test, where you send photons through a prism into two different directions and you polarize one, and the other stream of photons from a laser gets also polarized. And you can do this by putting a polarizing detector sheet on there and seeing which way it's polarized. Now, if time away in the traveling of the speed of light away from the prism is measured, then both of those detectors should be at exactly the same point in time or distance, because remember, space and time is the same thing when you talk about light. So the same distance away from the prism. You would think naturally, Mackie, how's this? You'd think naturally that changing one, we're familiar with the other one changing, that's fine. But if I put my detecting sheet closer to the prism, it's still being changed through quantum entanglement even before it hits the other side. So if out the left side I let it run a kilometer before or a mile, right? Mile down the road, I put the polarizing filter in place, and only 3 inches away from the prism on the other side of it, I put a detecting screen on. The moment I go down the road and I put in the polarizing screen, this one, like a mile down the road, all the time it took before it became polarized, it's already hit this other sheet, but in fact, it goes back in time and changes it. Mackie and I covered this in our double slit experiment show. That is an example of time travel. It's
And causality breakdown, absolutely.
absolutely, because it's not cause and effect. It's doing it in hindsight. I mean, how can it do it in hindsight? It's a particle of light. It's a photon. I say particle light, which I consider the irony in that. However, it's a photon, and the photon itself doesn't know what's going on. But Mackie and I point this out one more time, and that is, if this world is itself an illusion, not just time and space is being an illusion, but if the whole entire universe, we're actually in a hologram, the holographic universe, then the computer that's driving all of this only needs to render what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, what's being seen. And that to me appears to be what causes this, and that might be the next new theory. Who knows? But anyway, I had to put that in there, Mackie. I've been dying to mention it since last night. All right.
But yeah, important, and thank you. No, absolutely, and hopefully that illustrates even further how really screwed up reality is.
You know, if it all made sense, if everything made sense, if, you know, quantum entanglement, whether it existed or not, doesn't matter. If it made sense, we wouldn't be having this discussion. They would have labeled it, we proved it, we can replicate it, it's done, don't worry about it, it has no effect on anything, don't even worry about it. If the double slit experiment only ever gave us a painted particle pattern on the back, wouldn't have to talk about it. There it is. It's like pouring water in a cup. Look, I put it in. There you go. Do I have to do it again? Nope.
That's right. Now, think about it this way. I just thought of this. I don't know if you've observed children play in a sandbox. In a sandbox, you got 5, 6 children, whatever they're doing in the sandbox, but they're playing within certain parameters. Right? For them, the sandbox, for argument's sake, is the universe. That's where they're playing. That's where they're completely immersed in their play, building sandcastles, playing with little cars. But seemingly within the confines of the sandbox. They don't go out of the sandbox. So very few children do, but it's all within that sandbox. And if you took the walls of the sandbox away, if you spread the sand out further, it would still be the sandbox, right? It would still be a sandbox that children are playing, and for them, that's where they're at. And maybe in a similar fashion, that's exactly where we are. We are in our little sandbox, and even if you took the walls of the sandbox away and expanded the sandbox and made it bigger as we're exploring the universe, all these wonderful things, it would still just be the sandbox, and we're completely oblivious to the rest of the world, or reality, as it were, right? So it is a limiting kind of reality we're in, and this seeming contradiction of our logic, which I said earlier is just our logic, and we can't shoehorn reality into our way of thinking, guys, then maybe our logic is flawed. Maybe our approach is flawed altogether. We've been taught the wrong things all our lives. We've been taught to look at it the wrong way all our lives. That we have the inherent capacity to process more, I really do, but deliberately, or by circumstances, like coincidence, we were kept away from realizing our potential. So we're still within the sandbox, because we talk about things like, logically that doesn't make sense, or what's causality, or it's completely counterintuitive, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, that's all true, based on our little sandbox. Okay?
Yeah, that's true, Mackie.
Completely true.
Good point.
Right. So we need to maybe. It's this. Dave? How do you jump over your own shadow? How? You can't. It's tough, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, so that's probably something we have to let you guys ponder for yourselves as well. We're trying to come up with solutions here and positive ways forward on how to expand our consciousness on how to perceive reality as it really is, but. It's not done in an afternoon, I can tell you that.
No, it's certainly not. All right, so look, the history of time travel as a concept, you have to think about that. Time travel itself, there is no widespread agreement as to which written work should be considered as the earliest example of time travel or a time travel story, since a number of early works feature elements ambiguously. What was that? Ambiguously, that's right. Suggestive of time travel itself. So while they didn't explain it, it was there in the story. Like a robot that travels back in time for some reason. That's a Simpsons gag. Ancient folk tales and myths sometimes involve something akin to traveling forward in time. For example, in Hindu mythology, the Mahabharata mentions the story of King Ravata Kukamundi, that'll do. I know I didn't say it right. Who travels to Earth to meet the creator Brahma. And I'll say it right, so Ravata Kakudmi. There we go. Now, he travels forward in time to meet the creator Brahma, who is shocked to learn that many ages have passed when he returns to Earth. The Buddhist Pali Canon also mentions time moving at a different pace or different paces. And in the Pavasi Sutta, one of Buddha's chief disciples, Kumara Kassapa, explains to the skeptic, I'm glad I got this one, Meki, Payasi, that in the heaven of the 30... Uh-oh.
Okay.
Yeah, do you know what that is?
Something is.
That was a power failure that's just come good again. All right. Good. A power failure. Anyway, it's all good. Okay, so it says, and I quote, in the heaven of the 33 divas, time passes at a different pace, and people live much longer. Actually, you know what it actually sounds like, Mickey? It does sound like... it sounds like a different world, or like the ancients who lived 700 years. In the period of our century, 100 years, only a single day, 24 hours, would have passed for them. Wow, that's a quote. In Islam, differently, there is some references to time travel. The Quran tells about several individuals who go to sleep in a cave only to wake up after 309 years. It almost sounds like stasis. There is also a reference about time variation where it states... Oh, goodness me. Actually, that sounds like a smoke detector. It's gone off again. There's also reference to a variation in times, and it states, 1 day for God, Allah, is 1,000 years of what you human beings count. Wow, there's 1,000 years, not 100. A similar idea is described in the Christian New Testament book of Peter, or book 2, or book of 2 Peter, where Peter states that with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. That's exactly the same explanation as the Quran. That was 2 Peter 3:8. Another of the earliest known stories to involve traveling forward in time to a distant future was the Japanese tale of Urashima Taro, first described in the Nihongi, which was back in 720 AD. It was about a young fisherman named Urashima Taro who visits an undersea palace and stays there for 3 days. After returning home to his village, he finds himself 300 years in the future. When he's obviously long forgotten by this time, and his house is in ruins and his family long dead. What a tale. Another very old example of this type of story can be found in the Talmud, with the story of Honi Hamagel, who went to sleep for 70 years and woke up to a world where his grandchildren were grandparents and where his family and friends were dead. Now, it looks like a common theme of those people who travel forward. Now, I want to just remind everyone, we are all traveling forward in time. Every single day. Every moment of every day, we're going forward in time. How fast we go forward in time can be felt. Some people describe it as being less or more. The quickening. Sometimes you experience a day and it feels like forever. Sometimes it just goes by and you don't know what happened. So, some interesting points there. And one, I don't know if you made the joke already, Meki, but when do we want time travel?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, exactly. What do we want? Time travel. When do we want it? Doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Yeah, no.
Because if
It's like a daddy. It's like a dad joke, right? Now I've made it. Woo! You got a Da Capo presentation. No, look, but look, these are interesting. From the point of view that this, of course, has been with us forever. I mean, we would have wondered about the nature of time from the start. And these are the things that we know about. Of course, there would have been many stories lost, many philosophical musings lost in the sands of time. And it's quite conceivable that this mystery of time was thought about very deeply. Well, since the beginning of time. Be a bit double Dutchy here, but there are stories which show us potential rips in time, potential rips, because they can't be proven one way or another. I mean, if we look at the scientific method here, completely useless, because how do you recreate a rip in time? So, let's take it to the lab. Let's cut it up and measure it. How heavy is it? I don't know. Zippy 2344. I've been somewhere, I'm sure. But where I've been all these years. Unless of course it's a very clever suggestion, or very clever reference to my frequent travels. So I was absent 1 week, I think, only, but anyway. So there are these stories which are anecdotal in by nature. You probably have some of these yourself, or you might have heard some, or you might have some experiences yourself, where time seems to have acted in a very odd way. And we're going to go through this here one by one with you. Flight into the future. Flight into the future. In 1935, Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard of the British Royal Air Force had a harrowing experience in his Hawker Hart biplane. Goddard was a wing commander at the time, and while on a flight from Edinburgh in Scotland to his home in Andover in England, he decided to fly over an abandoned airfield at Dram, which is not far from Edinburgh. The useless airfield was overgrown with foliage, the hangars were falling apart, and cows grazed where planes were once parked. Goddard then continued his flight to Andover, but encountered a bizarre storm. In the high winds of the storm's strange brown-yellow clouds, he lost control of his plane, which began to spiral toward the ground. Narrowly averting a crash, Goddard found that his plane was heading back toward Dram. As he approached the old airfield, the storm suddenly vanished, and Goddard's plane was now flying in brilliant sunshine. This time, however, as he flew over the Dram airfield, it looked completely different. The hangars looked like new. There were 4 airplanes on the ground. 3 were familiar biplanes, but painted in an unfamiliar yellow. The 4th was a monoplane, with which the RAF had none of in 1935. None. The mechanics were dressed in blue overalls, which Goddard thought odd, since all RAF mechanics dressed in brown overalls. Strange, too, that none of the mechanics seemed to notice him fly over. Leaving the area, he again encountered the storm, but managed to make his way back to Andover. It wasn't until 1939 that the RAF began to paint their planes yellow, and enlisted a monoplane of the type that Goddard saw, and the mechanics' uniforms were switched to blue. Had Goddard, in fact, somehow flown 4 years into the future, then returned to his own time? Now, very quickly here, we seem to encounter these kinds of electromagnetic disturbances, because that's what a storm is, a lot when we talk about time rifts. The Bermuda Triangle stories are riddled storms, and very funny cloud formations and funny colors, right? It's all just oddness. So the question here is there a natural phenomenon, or maybe a machine, an ancient machine malfunctioning, that causes these rifts in what we consider to be space-time? What is the mechanism here? And it is clear as day that there is something like that that is required for this to occur, some kind of electromagnetic disturbance. So I think this bears much more investigation going forward, and maybe that's what the Nazi Bell experiments showed as well, right? We did some shows on that, but the electromagnetic properties of storms, space-time, frequencies, Dave, gravity, it's all pointing to something.
Yeah, I know. Look, the next story is caught in a temporal vortex. Dr. Raul Rios Centino, a medical doctor and an investigator of the paranormal, recounted to author Scott Corrales, a story told to him by one of his patients. A 30-year-old woman who came to him with a serious case of hemiplegia, which is the total paralysis of one side of her body. Quoted here, it says, "I was at a campground in the vicinity of Marcahuse, as she told him, and that was the famous stone forest located about 35 miles east of Lima in Peru. She said, I went out exploring late at night with some friends. Oddly enough, we heard the strains of music and noticed a small torch-lit stone cabin. I was able to see people dancing inside, but upon getting closer, I felt a sudden sensation of cold, which I paid little attention to, and I stuck my head through an open door. It was then that I saw the occupants were clad in 17th century fashion. I tried to enter the room, but one of my girlfriends pulled me out. It was at this moment that half of the woman's body became paralyzed. Was it because the woman's friend pulled her out of the stone cabin when she was half entered into it? Was half her body caught in some temporal vortex or dimensional doorway? Dr. Centeno reported that an EEG was able to show that her left hemisphere of the brain did not show signs of normal functioning, as well as an abnormal amount of electric waves. This kind of thing, Meki, is entering a change in the time continuum, or energy time displacements, or whatever you want to call it in sci-fi speak. This same event is exercised in a number of sci-fi shows that I've seen, where people encounter something and get sort of half into it.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds plausible to me, but what was this Tudor festival that she happened in on?
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, well, back then, there would have been, back in Lima, Peru, that time there would have Spaniards. It's possible. But what is interesting though is that there was a physical effect on her. So the electromagnetic field that she entered, and we have to say it's electromagnetic because it actually influenced or had an effect on her nervous system and brain, right? Which is essentially run electrically. We are actually electrical creatures. It is very interesting that this effect was observed, which lends credence to our statements earlier that whatever phenomenon here we're looking at when it comes to time rifts must be electromagnetic in nature. So people have always tried this and tried that when it came to time travel, but maybe we should really focus our attention here to the creation of a machine that creates very specific electromagnetic fields, like with very specific frequencies, right? And like I said again earlier, maybe this is what the Nazi Bell experiments found, and maybe that's what the Philadelphia experiment found as well. Because we're talking about electromagnetic phenomena here. Maybe time and space are fundamentally electromagnetic phenomena in this particular reality. Let's investigate that further as soon as we get the appropriate funding. Dave, how's that?
Yes, all right, let's do that.
Oh, sorry, I have to mention this because I just heard it on the radio. The Tagara UFO
Tigra
Society,
Lakes UFO Society, yep.
yes, they used to receive, or they are receiving government funding to the tune of $6,000 or whatever $1,000 a year.
That was $3,800, Mickey.
Oh, okay, right. So now apparently this member of parliament says, "Oh, I don't know why they're doing it, and I'm sure they're nice people, but I can't see what the the common sense." He said, "Common sense, would say that we shouldn't spend money on that kind of stuff." And I thought to myself, you moron!
Well,
you want to take that funding away?
I've actually got one of the results of the funding on my desk here, because I've attended the Tuggerah Lakes UFO Society, and I've also spoken there, Becky, as a guest speaker. I've not received any money from them, of course, but the money that they tried to get the grant for was, and on behalf of the society, I think they're doing a reasonable job. They've got a good collection of people there, and they have a lot of people that come and speak. And that was to investigate the Gosford files. Now, the Gosford files was a sighting that took place where I live, not by me, but in the area, and a rather spherical, illuminated at night time, of course, UFO was seen by police, public servants, the public. There was a long sighting, and it drifted in and out down the coast, and eventually stopped over Brisbane Water, where I'm not very far away, about a mile, 2 miles. And it appeared as though it was sucking water up into itself. Completely silent, except for a small hum when it did the sucking thing with the water. And so many people saw it, and it lasted for ages. Now, the Gosford Files investigation, where they went around asking people all about this, was what the original grant was for. That's it. That's what it was.
No, but
and just putting it out there so people understand that the government's now questioning, why do we give them the money for this? And they said, well, we spent most of it on the research, but every once in a while there's some disabled people that we have to go and pick up, and we do that and we drop them back home again so they can attend the meetings. I think it's a really nice thing. The government doesn't seem to have the same approach to it, and in fact, the story seems to also ridicule the Gosford UFO or Tuggerah Lakes UFO Society in its actions.
Yes, because within the sandbox we occupy, there are smaller sandboxes. People like to play. Ooh, don't play with those guys. They're too close to the edge of the sandbox. This is what it is, my friend. It's unfortunate, but because those few $1,000s in the scheme of things don't make a difference. They're not going to save the budget, but they may assist. Well, they won't, yeah. But they may assist in helping people investigate happenings. It's just my opinion. I don't know who am I? I'm just a voter. I'm just a voter. Now, Alien Girl. Sorry, just to digress very quickly. I would love to hear more about that story about the Forest Gnome. If you can write it down and maybe time it as well. You can give me some timelines around that, plus locations. That would be awesome. Mm-hmm. Alien Girl. So if you can do that, time, location, things like that, and more detail, I'd be very happy to look at some of that, because I believe I've seen similar things.
And that also goes back to the old German stories too, doesn't it, Mickey?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Heinzel Männchen and so forth. Look, there are many stories of this nature. So I would love to know more, because again, there are layers and layers of reality which we're just peeling back. It's like a large stinky onion. Highway to the past.
Highway to the past.
That's what it is. In October of 1969, when I was 4 months old, I want to say, a man identified only as LC and his business associate, Charlie, were driving north from Apeville in Louisiana towards Lafayette on Highway 167. Actually, I was not too far from there very recently. As they were driving along the nearly empty road, they began to overtake what appeared to be an antique car traveling very slowly. The two men were impressed by the mint condition of the nearly 30-year-old car It looked virtually new, and puzzled by its bright orange license plate, on which was stamped only 1940. They figured, however, that the car had been part of some antique auto show. As they passed the slow-moving vehicle, they slowed their car to get a good look at the old model. The driver of the old car was a young woman dressed in vintage 1940s clothing, and a passenger was a small child, likewise dressed. The woman seemed panicked and confused. Elsie asked if she needed help, and through her rolled-up window indicated yes. Elsie motioned for her to pull off to the side road. The businessman pulled ahead of the old car and turned onto the shoulder of the road. When they got out, the old car had vanished without a trace. There were no turnoffs or anywhere else the vehicle could have gone. Moments later, another car pulled up to the businessman and, quite puzzled, said he had seen their car pull off to the side, and the old car simply vanished into thin air. There's more to the story from other sources, which we don't have here, and this was around these people staying in touch with each other, calling each other once in a while, just to confirm that what they had experienced, they actually experienced. Because this is obviously something. So, Dave, what I find that when people do experience something extraordinary, they rationalize it, or convince themselves it never happened, or find some other way of fitting it into their worldview.
Yeah, completely.
Very rarely is the worldview changed by something like this, right?
No, that's right. Even though it exists, it exists perfectly well, and I think it's hilarious that we do this to ourselves. Even my own sighting of the orange orb, Meki, I was convinced that. Well, I was watching myself convince myself from a bystander's point of view, where I know what I saw, but my brain is telling me, oh, you know what? It was just an aircraft engine that had somehow fallen off a plane and was traveling way too slow. But yeah, that doesn't matter, because anything else wouldn't be real. And that's what I did to myself. Until I went, you know what? That doesn't make sense. A plane's engine couldn't still operate without fuel, or travel only, at a couple miles an hour. So I had to exclude it. But my brain immediately attempted to hit me with that and wouldn't let up. So I completely understand the rationalization of bizarre occurrences in your life. Now, the future Roadhouse. One night in 1972, 4 co-eds from Southern Utah University were driving back to their dorm in Cedar City after spending the day at a rodeo in Pioche, Nevada. It was about 10 p.m. and the girls were eager to get back to their dorm before curfew. You can imagine how desperate that would be. They were traveling along Highway 56, which has a reputation for being haunted. A while after taking a fork in the road that turned to the north, the girls were surprised to see that the black asphalt had turned into white cement road that eventually ended abruptly at a cliff face. They turned around and tried to find their way back to the highway, but soon became concerned about the unfamiliar landscape. Red canyon walls that gave way to open grain fields and pine trees, which they had never encountered before in this part of the state. Feeling completely lost, the girls felt some comfort when they approached a roadhouse or tavern. From their memory, of course, that is. They pulled into the parking lot, and one of the passengers poked her head out of the window to get directions from a few men coming out of the building. But she screamed and ordered the driver to get out of there fast. The girls sped off, but realized they were being chased by the men in strange, tri-wheeled, egg-shaped vehicles. Speeding again through the canyon, the girls seemed to have lost their pursuers and found their way to the familiar desert highway. The reason for the scream? The men, she said, weren't human.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Right? This is some interesting stuff here. And like I said, we do actually follow up these stories that we find, and we try to get to the bottom of it, and see where the first reports came from. Sometimes they're just stories taken from books. Sometimes they're reports in newspapers. But there's always more than one source. Whatever we bring to you, there's always more than one source that it came from. So again, this is some fascinating stuff. The next one here is the Hotel Time Warp. Two British couples vacationing in the north of France in 1979 were driving, looking for a place to stay for the night. Along the way, this is like the start of a horror story, right? Along the way, they were struck by some signs that seemed to be for a very old-fashioned type of circus. The first building they came to looked like it might be a motel, but some men standing in front of it told the travelers that it was an inn, and that a hotel could be found down the road. Further on, they did find an old-fashioned building marked hotel. Inside, they discovered almost everything was made of heavy wood. There seemed to be no evidence of such modern conveniences as telephones. Their room had no locks, but simple wooden latches, and the windows had wooden shutters but no glass. In the morning, as they ate breakfast, two gendarmes, policemen, entered wearing very old-fashioned caped uniforms. After getting what turned out to be very bad directions to Avignon from the gendarmes, the couples paid a bill that came to only 19 francs, and they left. So that's very little money, in fact. After 2 weeks in Spain, the couples made a return trip to France and decided again to stay at the interesting, if odd, but very cheap hotel. This time, however, the hotel could not be found. Certain they were in the exact same spot, they saw the same circus posters. They realized that the old hotel had completely vanished without a trace. Photos taken at the hotel did not develop, and a little research revealed that French gendarmes, or police, wore uniforms of that description prior to 1905.
Wow. I believe these kind of time issues, or fractures in time, revealing a past or a future, I think they're more common than we'd like to admit to ourselves. A preview of an air raid. In 1932, German newspaper reporter J. Bernhard Hutten and his colleague photographer, Joachim Brandt, were assigned to do a story on the Hamburg-Altona shipyards. After being given a tour by the shipyard executive, the two newspapermen were leaving when they heard the drone of overhead aircraft. They at first thought it was a practice drill, but that notion was quickly dispelled when bombs began exploding all around them, and the roar of anti-aircraft gunfire filled the air. The sky quickly darkened, and they were in the middle of a full-blown air raid. They quickly got in their car and drove away from the shipyard back towards Hamburg. As they left the area, however, the sky seemed to brighten, and they again found themselves in the light of calm. Ordinary late afternoon it was. They looked back at the shipyards, and there was no destruction. No bomb-induced inferno. They had just left. No aircraft in the sky. But photos Brandt had taken during the attack showed nothing unusual. It wasn't until 1943 that the British Royal Air Force attacked it and destroyed the shipyard, just as Hutten and Brandt had experienced it 11 years earlier.
And again, the photos. So the question is it just the mind that experiences it? Do you know what I mean? So is it just your mind that sees all these things, and anything physically with you, like a photo, like a video camera or photo camera, can't, because they are not transported with you. Only your mind is. And these are very interesting questions, or maybe there's some other phenomenon at play here. Now, the next one you have to take with a grain of salt, of course, but maybe not, in fact, as it were. This is a visit to Mars with Barack Obama. Seattle attorney Andrew Basiago says that when he was a child, he and William Stillings were chrononauts in a secret United States government time travel program called Project Pegasus. I urge you to have a look at that. The purpose of the program was threefold: to protect Earth from threats from space, to establish territorial sovereignty over Mars, and to acclimatize Martian humanoids and animals to our presence. The best part of Bastiago's and Starling's claims, however, is that one of their fellow time travelers was none other than a 19-year-old Barack Obama, who went by the name of Barry Soetoro. In fact, we know that it's true, and there's other stories about Barry Soetoro out there in the ether. In 1980, the 3 men and 7 other youths from their Mars training class at California's College of the Siskiyous, which is a real institution, traveled to Mars via top secret teleportation jump room, modeled on technical papers found in Nikola Tesla's apartment after his death. They jumped through a field of radiant energy into a tunnel, and when the tunnel closed, found themselves at their destination. Now, the White House has actually officially denied that Obama ever went to Mars.
Now, Mackie, we interviewed Bernie Mendez a long time ago for 4 hours. And he spoke about the jump rooms and the jump room program.
So did Laura Eisenhower.
Yeah, that's true too. So, is it real? Was it real? Does it still exist? I mean, it sounds plausible. But, the grain of salt thing, Mackie, we've got to keep applying to it. And of course, if I experience a time issue, what about the guy who comes back? Do you remember that story, Mackie? The guy that met himself in the future and took photos?
Yes, when he was 70 years old. Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Yes. I didn't include the sea, or did I? Or maybe
No,
I did.
I haven't seen that yet.
But yes. No. But yes, you're right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Now, because we've only got 3 minutes to the end of the show, what I want to do is talk about next week. There was the Bermuda Triangle, which you mentioned a little earlier, came to mind because of the pilot who went through a weird cloud, like a rotating cylinder, cloud-shaped cylinder in the sky, and arrived at his destination in his Cessna way earlier than his plane was capable of taking him that distance. And from an evidence-based point of view, both airports have a time where he's left and arrived. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty solid. I mean, the aircraft logs are very importantly maintained and accurate. And he states it himself. Look, it looked a bit unusual, but, when I thought I was, halfway to my journey and I radioed the control tower, it turned out to be I was at my destination, only to his surprise. So what I'll do, I'll dig that story up for next week, and we'll get the details of that one. But there are so many of these.
Yes.
Deja vu, like you mentioned, Mackie, is a way that we see the future. It's the future echoing back at us, and we happen to pick it up.
And most importantly, we remember it. I think we're exposed to future rifts all the time.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, we completely edit them out of our existence. So,
Yeah.
1 second, Mike.
So the fact that deja vu exists, it's certainly a French word, and it means having already seen, or having seen before.
Yes, that's right.
Means that it's not just you and me, Mackie, that are seeing this stuff. There's a scripture for it, and lots of other people have felt it. And there's a weird sensation you get when you get it.
It's a thing. Exactly. It's a thing, and it is a weird sensation. Deja vu is a weird sensation. Now, but we have now put it into a box. We've labeled it deja vu. Boom. Thank you very much. It's same again. I'll bring it up again, but it's the same with the placebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
And other things. As soon as